Bank manager throws black CEO's dad's ID on the floor. $5 billion deal ends immediately. For most of his 61 years, Samuel Turner lived by one rule: never let the world decide your worth. He had learned that lesson young, back when people looked at him and saw limits instead of potential. Through decades of sweat, patience, and an unshakable sense of purpose, he built a life that few could imagine. In his 30s, he started Turner Freight Solutions, a 2-truck operation run from a rented garage on the south side of Atlanta. He made deliveries himself at first, driving long hours, sleeping in rest stops, learning the rhythm of business mile by mile. He weathered fuel crises, union strikes, and recessions that shuttered entire industries. But Samuel didn't quit. Every challenge hardened him. Every setback sharpened his resolve. By his late 50s, he'd turned that humble business into one of the country's leading logistics firms, employing hundreds and partnering with Fortune 500 companies. When he finally sold the company for over $400 million, his friends expected him to retire in luxury. But Samuel had never been driven by wealth. He moved into a modest lakeside home just outside the city, spent mornings reading by the water, and mentored young entrepreneurs who reminded him of himself. Hungry, overlooked, determined to prove the world wrong. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. The one person he was proudest of, though, was his daughter, Vanessa Turner. She was his mirror in ambition and his opposite in temperament. Where Samuel was patient and understated, Vanessa was bold and unyielding. She had graduated top of her class, climbed the corporate ladder in record time, and by 40 had become the CEO of Avalon Industries, a global tech powerhouse reshaping how logistics and artificial intelligence work together. Vanessa was currently leading Avalon's biggest deal yet, a $6.3 billion partnership with Eastbridge Capital Bank. It was the kind of contract that would make headlines across the financial world. Eastbridge stood to gain prestige, Avalon would secure global expansion, and Vanessa was poised to cement her legacy as one of the most influential black CEOs in the industry. Samuel followed her success from a quiet distance, proud but never intrusive. He visited her offices occasionally, offered advice when she asked, and often reminded her, money moves fast, but respect, that's what lasts. One clear Thursday morning, Samuel decided to stop by Eastbridge Capital's downtown branch. Vanessa had asked him to handle a simple transfer related to their family trust account, a small administrative task that should have taken 10 minutes at most. He dressed neatly, as he always did, gray blazer, white shirt, polished shoes. His presence was calm but confident, the kind that came from years of knowing who you are, no matter who's watching. Eastbridge Capital's lobby gleamed with marble floors, glass walls, and gold-trimmed signage. It smelled faintly of espresso and ambition, the kind of place where people spoke softly but judged loudly. As Samuel stepped up to the front desk, a young receptionist greeted him politely and directed him to the branch manager for verification. That's when Gregory Shaw appeared. Gregory was in his late 30s, clean-cut, crisp suit, the picture of corporate composure. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He glanced at Samuel's paperwork, then at Samuel himself, the kind of slow, assessing look that told a story without words. His tone was professional but laced with condescension. "And what kind of transfer are we talking about, sir?" Samuel explained calmly, sliding his ID and documents across the counter. Gregory examined them, frowning slightly. "That's quite a large amount. Are you sure you're at the right branch?" The question wasn't about procedure. It was about an assumption. People nearby began to notice the exchange. A few customers looked up briefly, sensing the discomfort but choosing not to intervene. Samuel's voice stayed steady. "Yes, I'm certain. Everything should be in order." Gregory sighed, as though inconvenienced. He handed back the paperwork, or rather, he tossed it. The ID slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. The sharp sound echoed across the quiet lobby. For a moment, no one moved. The receptionist's smile faltered. A man waiting by the teller window shifted uncomfortably. Gregory didn't flinch. "You'll have to provide additional verification," he said, his tone dismissive. "Clients like you should try community banks. This one's a bit above your profile." Samuel looked at him, not angry, just disappointed. Slowly, he bent down, picked up the card, and held it for a moment. It wasn't about the plastic ID. It was about everything it represented. He placed it back into his wallet, gave a small nod, and said quietly, "I only came to make a simple transfer, but I see I came to the wrong place." He turned and walked out, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Gregory smirked and muttered to his assistant, "They always get defensive when you ask for proper documentation." Lauren, the assistant, didn't respond. She'd seen that look before, the smirk that came from unchecked arrogance. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass towers. Samuel walked toward his car, his mind calm but heavy. He'd faced prejudice before, from suppliers, partners, and investors, but it stung differently this time. Not because of what Gregory did, but because of how easily everyone accepted it. That evening, Samuel met Vanessa for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. He almost didn't mention the incident, but when she asked how his day had been, he told her the truth. Her fork froze midair. "He threw your ID on the floor?" she asked, her voice low but trembling with anger. Samuel nodded, downplaying it. "Let it go, Vanessa. I've seen worse. It's not worth your energy." But Vanessa wasn't hearing him anymore. In her mind, she was already replaying the moment, picturing her father's calm dignity against the smugness of that manager. She felt something break, a sense of tolerance she didn't realize she'd been carrying. For her, it wasn't just about an insult. It was about what it represented, a system that still saw men like her father as less no matter how much they achieved. And now, that same institution was trying to partner with her company. As they left the restaurant, Samuel thought the day was behind them. Vanessa, on the other hand, was already thinking ahead. Because for every careless act, there's always a consequence waiting to unfold. And the one that started on that marble floor was about to shake an entire empire. Over the next few days, life at Eastbridge Capital went on as if nothing had happened. The morning coffee runs, the boardroom chatter, the polite smiles, everything continued unchanged. But beneath that polished surface, something invisible had begun to move. Samuel Turner had walked out quietly, but silence can sometimes be the loudest warning of all. Vanessa Turner, however, wasn't quiet. The night of the dinner, she sat in her office long after midnight, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls. Her father's calm words replayed in her mind like a challenge. Let it go. But she couldn't. Not after picturing him, a man who had built his life on hard work and integrity, being treated like he didn't belong. The idea that the same institution negotiating with her company could treat him that way made her stomach twist. The next morning, she called her legal counsel and Avalon's compliance director. I want a background report on Eastbridge, she said. Public records, employee reviews, internal diversity data, everything. At first, her team hesitated. They knew the partnership was massive, months in the making. But Vanessa's tone left no room for debate. Meanwhile, Samuel quietly started doing something of his own. He wasn't one for confrontation, but he believed in truth. And truth, he knew, didn't need to shout. He started gathering evidence. He checked Gregory Shaw's public social media profiles and found a trail of arrogance hiding behind professionalism. Subtle comments about unqualified clients, thinly veiled jokes about diversity hires, and shared posts mocking entitlement culture. Samuel didn't need to embellish any of it. The screenshots spoke for themselves. He printed them, each one a quiet record of disrespect that had gone unchecked for far too long. He gave the folder to Vanessa the next time they met. You'll know what to do with this, he said simply. At Avalon's headquarters, Vanessa's legal team connected the dots. They discovered that Eastbridge Capital's internal compliance policies were riddled with violations, inconsistent treatment of clients, a pattern of biased complaints that were quietly dismissed, and even an internal memo advising staff to be discreet when questioning non-traditional high-net-worth clients. The deeper they looked, the worse it got. For Vanessa, this was no longer personal. It was a principle. While she prepared her next steps, Gregory Shaw remained blissfully unaware of the storm forming above him. He was busy planning his weekend golf trip and updating his LinkedIn profile with another self-congratulatory post about elite client relations. His arrogance was on display for the world to see. But now the right people were watching. A week later, Eastbridge's regional director, Patrick Lawson, sent Gregory an email marked urgent. Executive review meeting. Gregory grinned as he read it. He assumed it meant what he'd been expecting, the promotion he'd been subtly hinting at for months. He spent the night before the meeting polishing his presentation, rehearsing lines about customer growth and branch performance. He wanted to look confident, indispensable. But when he walked into the boardroom the next morning, the air felt different. The glass walls, the silence, the faint buzz of tension. Something was off. Then he saw her. At the head of the table sat Vanessa Turner. Calm, focused, flanked by Avalon's legal counsel and Eastbridge's senior directors. And beside her, quietly sitting with folded hands, was Samuel Turner. Gregory's steps faltered. His confident smile vanished. "Mr. Shaw," Patrick Lawson began, clearing his throat. "Thank you for joining us. Ms. Turner has requested this meeting regarding a matter of urgency." Vanessa looked directly at him. "Mr. Shaw," she said evenly, "I believe you already know my father." Gregory tried to speak, but his voice caught. The room seemed to close in. He mumbled something about misunderstanding, about protocol, about procedure. Vanessa didn't respond. Instead, she slid a folder across the table, the same one Samuel had given her days earlier. Gregory opened it and froze. Screenshots of his posts, timestamps, internal memos, all neatly organized and labeled. "This isn't a misunderstanding," Vanessa said, her voice steady but cutting. "This is your culture." She turned to Patrick Lawson. "Avalon Industries is formally withdrawing from the Eastbridge partnership. Effective immediately." The words hit like a hammer. Patrick's eyes widened. "Ms. Turner, please, let's discuss this. We can review the incident internally." But Samuel finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, but carried the kind of weight that doesn't come from authority. It comes from truth. "When a client's ID is thrown on the floor, it's not just an insult," he said. "It's a reflection of who the institution truly serves." Silence. No one dared to speak. Gregory sat frozen, color draining from his face. The realization hit. The deal, the promotion, his reputation, everything was gone. By the time he left the room, the entire floor seemed to know. Word spread fast. A $6.3 billion partnership, gone. Within hours, the story was circulating inside Eastbridge's internal chat groups. By evening, finance news outlets were picking it up. Avalon withdraws $6.3 billion deal amid discrimination scandal. Vanessa didn't comment publicly. She didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. At Eastbridge, damage control began immediately. Meetings were called, statements drafted, apologies rehearsed. But the fallout was already too large. Investors began questioning the bank's leadership. Clients started pulling accounts. Inside the branch, Gregory tried to act normally. But every glance felt like judgment. Every silence like condemnation. 2 weeks later, the termination letter came. He was escorted out of the building, where he once ruled with quiet authority. Lauren, the assistant who had watched it all happen, was promoted soon after. Her first act as branch manager was to start a diversity and ethics initiative, the kind of change the bank had needed years ago. But the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, the true reckoning doesn't come from headlines or firings. It comes later in unexpected encounters that force people to face what they've done. And for Gregory Shaw, that moment was still waiting. The fallout from Avalon's withdrawal spread through Eastbridge Capital like a silent explosion. In just 48 hours, the story jumped from whispered office gossip to front-page coverage. Financial blogs dissected every detail, news anchors speculated about corporate accountability, and commentators debated how one small act of disrespect could cost a major institution billions. The Eastbridge boardroom, once a symbol of quiet authority, now felt like a courtroom. Executives shuffled through emergency meetings, lawyers spoke in circles, and public relations teams worked overtime to contain the damage. But the truth was out. The screenshots, the internal memos, the culture of arrogance that Samuel and Vanessa had exposed. It all painted a picture no spin could erase. Gregory Shaw became the name everyone whispered but no one defended. His LinkedIn disappeared overnight. His phone stopped ringing. And when the official termination email arrived, it was only 2 sentences long. The man who had built his confidence on control now had none left. He spent days avoiding the news, hoping the storm would pass. But then came the moment he couldn't avoid. The internal statement from Eastbridge's CEO. Effective immediately, Eastbridge Capital is launching a company-wide restructuring focused on ethics, inclusion, and client respect. To Gregory, it felt like a sentence. To everyone else, it felt like overdue justice. But for Samuel, the story wasn't about revenge. It was about reflection. He'd spent his entire life trying to prove that success could outlast prejudice. Yet here it was again, the same quiet disrespect he thought the world had outgrown. He didn't celebrate the scandal. He didn't post, comment, or speak publicly. Instead, he sat on his porch one evening, looking out over the lake, the water calm beneath the setting sun. His phone buzzed every few minutes with messages from friends and reporters, but he ignored them all. Vanessa stopped by that night. She looked exhausted, not from regret, but from the weight of victory that didn't feel like triumph. "We made our point," she said quietly, standing beside him. Samuel nodded, but his eyes stayed on the horizon. "And what did it cost them?" he asked. $6.3 billion, she said. He turned toward her. "And what did it cost us?" She hesitated. "Maybe a little more faith in people." For a long time they stood in silence. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked. The world went on, unaware of the lesson that had unfolded in those sterile bank halls. But fate wasn't done tying the story's threads together. A month later, Samuel was invited to speak at a private leadership forum in New York, a gathering of CEOs, executives, and policymakers. The topic, ethics and leadership in the modern economy. He didn't plan to attend at first. Public appearances weren't his thing. But Vanessa insisted. "They need to hear it from someone who lived it," she said. So he went. The conference was held in a grand ballroom overlooking the city skyline. The crowd buzzed with quiet anticipation as Samuel stepped onto the stage. He didn't read from notes or slides. He just told the story, not about names or companies, but about dignity, about what it means to be seen, and how easily trust can be broken when people forget that titles and wealth mean nothing without respect. When he finished, the audience stood and applauded. But as he stepped down from the stage, something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, a man approached, hesitant, nervous, older than before. Gregory Shaw. He looked thinner, paler, his once confident posture replaced by a kind of fragile humility. He had taken freelance consulting work since his firing, scraping by while trying to rebuild his name. He stopped a few feet away from Samuel. "Mr. Turner," he said quietly, voice trembling, "I just wanted to apologize." For a moment, Samuel said nothing. The room around them seemed to fade, leaving only the weight of that moment. The man who had thrown an ID on the floor now standing before the man whose silence had cost him everything. I didn't understand then, Gregory said, what that moment meant, what it said about me. Samuel studied him, not with anger but with something far more difficult, understanding. All you ever had to do, he said softly, was treat people like people. Gregory nodded, eyes wet. I know. Samuel took a slow breath. That lesson was free. The one you learned later wasn't. Gregory lowered his head. There was nothing left to say. As he walked away, Samuel felt something shift. Not victory, not revenge, but closure. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about the world seeing what it refused to see before. When he returned to his seat beside Vanessa, she whispered, "You handled that better than I could have." Samuel smiled faintly. That's why I went through it first. Outside, the night sky glowed above the city. The same city where arrogance had cost billions, and respect had rebuilt something stronger. But the story didn't end there. Because even after apologies fade and headlines move on, one question remains. A question Samuel posed in his next speech, one that made the room fall silent. How much is your respect worth? And what would it cost if you lost it? The audience didn't answer. They just listened. And somewhere in that silence, they understood why one man's quiet dignity could shake an empire that forgot the price of humanity. Months passed, but the echo of that single act, a card hitting the floor, didn't fade. It became more than a headline or a case study. It became a mirror. Across boardrooms and break rooms, people replayed the story in their heads, wondering how many times they'd looked at someone and seen less than they should have. HR departments used it in training sessions. Professors brought it up in business ethics lectures. And somewhere, quietly, people began to change the way they looked at the person standing across the counter. Samuel never sought fame. He wasn't interested in interviews or think pieces. But life had a way of pulling him into the spotlight whether he liked it or not. Invitations came from universities, conferences, and even from young professionals who said his story had given them the courage to speak up. At first, he turned most of them down. He wasn't sure what to say that hadn't already been said. But then one day, a letter arrived from a high school senior named Jordan. "I'm applying for my first job," it read. "Your story helped me believe I belong in every room I walk into, even if people act like I don't." That letter changed something in him. Samuel realized that the story wasn't his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed for something they couldn't change. So he began to speak again, not with anger, but with purpose. He talked about the quiet kind of racism that hides behind professionalism. The way people lower their voice when saying someone's name. The way assumptions sneak into meetings, promotions, and everyday interactions. He told people that dignity isn't a privilege. It's a birthright. And people listened. Not because he was powerful, but because he was calm. Because he didn't point fingers. He held up a mirror. Meanwhile, Eastbridge Capital tried to rebuild its image. They launched new diversity initiatives, hired new leadership, and funded scholarships under the banner of equity. But no matter how polished the campaigns looked, people still remembered what happened in that lobby. Gregory Shaw, after months of silence, reappeared on a podcast where he talked about unlearning bias. He admitted that losing everything had forced him to confront who he really was. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Vanessa left Eastbridge a few months later and joined a smaller firm that promised more than numbers. One that valued integrity over image. She and Samuel stayed in touch, not out of shared trauma, but out of mutual respect. They'd both seen what happens when silence protects the wrong people. As for Samuel, he returned to a quieter life. His business thrived, but his priorities shifted. He spent more time mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially those from communities that rarely got a seat at the table. He wanted to make sure no one else had to earn the respect that should have been theirs from the start. One afternoon, while speaking at a leadership summit, he shared something that silenced the room. He said, The moment that card hit the floor, it wasn't about money or power. It was about what people see when they look at you. And if they can't see your worth, sometimes you have to remind them, not with anger, but with excellence. The audience gave him a standing ovation, but his tone never rose above a whisper, because his goal wasn't applause. It was understanding, and that's what makes stories like his matter. They don't just expose injustice. They hold a mirror to the everyday choices that build or break respect. When people watched the video of the incident, slowed down, analyzed, and discussed, they focused on the ID card. But what they didn't realize was that it wasn't just a piece of plastic. It represented every time someone's identity was questioned, every time someone had to prove their right to belong. Samuel's story wasn't about a single bank, a single man, or even a single moment. It was about a pattern, one that stretches across generations and industries. It was about the countless people who walk into rooms every day and wonder if they'll be treated as equals. That's what makes this story bigger than him. Because even though it happened in a lobby, the same thing happens in classrooms, offices, restaurants, and board meetings all over the world. Sometimes loudly, often quietly. And that's why it matters that people don't just watch this story. They remember it. They talk about it. They let it change how they act when no one's watching. As Samuel said in his final public talk, standing before a crowd that filled the entire auditorium, maybe we can't change every heart, but we can change how we show up. We can choose respect, even when others don't. Because racism doesn't end when the guilty get punished. It ends when the rest of us stop looking away. The audience fell silent. No applause this time, just a reflection. And maybe that's how it should end, not with noise but with thought. So before you click away, ask yourself, what would you have done if you'd been in that lobby? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have picked up the card? What did you think about Samuel Turner's story? Did the bank manager's actions surprise you? Or did they remind you of something you've seen before? Tell us in the comments. Your thoughts matter more than you know. If the story moved you, hit the like button so more people can see it. And if you want more real, powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that need to be heard.